My parents kicked me out for refusing to fund my lazy brother while I paid every bill, so I succeeded without them and they begged. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I was labeled the responsible, low-maintenance one in my family. Not because I was born mature, but because someone had to be. My parents used to say it with this half-smile, like it was a compliment. "You're strong," my mom would say, handing me another problem. "You can handle it." And I believed her, because believing felt easier than fighting. My younger brother was different. He was fragile, sensitive, the one they worried about. If he struggled, it was stress. If he failed, it was pressure. If he messed up, it was never really his fault. I was the opposite. If something went wrong, my parents would look at me first, not with anger, but expectation. Like I'd already agreed to fix it. I started working part-time earlier than most of my friends. I skipped hangouts, birthdays, weekends out. Not because I was disciplined, but because there was always something that needed covering. A bill that came up short. Groceries that couldn't wait. My dad would sigh and say, "Just this once." My mom would add, "Your brother's going through a lot right now." And somehow, that made it my responsibility. I remember sitting at the kitchen table late at night, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge, counting cash from my wallet while my brother played games in his room. No one ever asked him to help. No one ever said he should step up. They'd just tell me, "You don't mind, right?" And I'd nod, even when my chest felt tight. Love in my house didn't feel unconditional. It felt earned. Transactional. I was praised when I was useful and invisible when I wasn't. Still, I told myself it meant something. That loyalty mattered. That sacrifice would be noticed eventually. I genuinely believed that if I kept showing up, kept being dependable, things would balance out one day. I just didn't realize how much I was about to lose before I stopped being useful. I didn't notice when helping out quietly turned into an obligation. It wasn't announced. There was no conversation where everyone agreed this was my role now. It just happened. One bill at a time. One emergency at a time. One guilt-laced request layered over another until my paycheck stopped feeling like income and started feeling pre-assigned. At first, it was small. My dad would say, "We're a little short this month," while rubbing his temples like the stress physically lived there. My mom would slide the electricity bill across the table and say, "You'll get it back, of course." I never did. Then groceries. Then internet. Then a temporary contribution toward rent. Every time I hesitated, they'd remind me, families support each other. And every time my brother's name came up, it was followed by, "He's not in a good place right now." I remember one night standing in the hallway, listening to my parents argue in low voices about money. My mom noticed me and immediately softened her tone. "We didn't mean for you to hear that," she said. Then, without missing a beat, she added, "You can help this month, right?" I said yes before I even processed the question. Saying no felt like lighting a match in a room full of gas. Meanwhile, my brother slept in, missed interviews, and complained about how hard life was. When I brought it up once, carefully, calmly, my dad snapped, "Don't start. You know he's different." Different. Like responsibility was something he was allergic to when I was immune. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the expectation. The way no one asked if I was okay. The way my sacrifices were treated as obvious, not extraordinary. If I looked tired, my mom would say, "Well, you're young. You'll bounce back." If I mentioned stress, she'd remind me how much worse my brother had it. I kept telling myself this was temporary. That once things stabilized, I'd breathe again. That surely my parents would notice how much I was carrying. But every month, the numbers got bigger. The requests got more confident. And the space I was allowed to exist in outside of being useful kept shrinking. Watching my brother drift through life felt like standing still while everything around me slowly collapsed. He'd stay up all night gaming, sleep past noon, and shrug off responsibility like it was optional. If he lost a job, it was because the boss was toxic. If he didn't apply anywhere, it was because he was figuring things out. My parents nodded along to every excuse like they made perfect sense. Whenever I tried to point out the imbalance, the room would change instantly. My mom's face would tighten, defensive before I even finished my sentence. "Why are you always comparing?" she'd ask. My dad would sigh and say, "You know your brother isn't built like you. Built like me." As if discipline and responsibility were genetic accidents instead of learned behavior. I remember one argument clearly. We were in the living room, the TV muted, tension thick in the air. I said, "I'm paying most of the bills now. Can we at least talk about him contributing something?" My mom snapped back, "So what, you want him to fail?" That question hit me harder than any insult. Suddenly, I wasn't asking for fairness, I was threatening his survival. My brother just sat there, scrolling on his phone, not defending himself, not offering to help. He didn't need to. My parents did that for him. I was painted as cold, calculating, ungrateful for even noticing the imbalance. The conversation always ended the same way, me apologizing for the way I said it, even though nothing ever changed. Resentment started building in places I didn't like acknowledging. I hated feeling angry at him, but I hated feeling invisible even more. Every time I handed over money, I felt smaller. Every time he was excused, I felt replaceable. What hurt most was realizing how normal this all felt to them. My exhaustion wasn't a red flag. It was proof I was doing my job. Meanwhile, my brother's comfort was treated like something sacred, worth protecting at any cost. I started to understand something terrifying. My role in the family wasn't loved son or equal sibling. I was the safety net. The backup plan. And as long as I kept catching everyone when they fell, no one had any reason to ask how hard the fall was for me. I didn't know it yet, but that realization was pushing me closer to a breaking point I wouldn't be able to talk my way out of. The moment everything shifted didn't come during a fight. It came during what my parents called a family discussion, which already made my stomach knot before I even sat down. We were at the dining table, the same one where I'd done homework, paid bills, and swallowed frustration for years. The air felt heavy, rehearsed, like they'd planned this without me. My dad cleared his throat and said, "We need to talk about next steps." My mom nodded, hands folded tightly in front of her. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "Your brother's been struggling more than we expected," she said carefully, like she was delivering bad news I was supposed to absorb calmly. "He needs time. Space. Support." I already knew where this was going, and my chest started to tighten. My dad leaned forward. "We think it would be best if you covered his expenses for a while. Fully. Just until he gets back on his feet." He said it like it was logical. Reasonable. Like he was asking me to water a plant, not put my life on pause. I asked how long a while was. My mom waved her hand. "Don't focus on timelines. That kind of thinking adds pressure." Pressure. The word made something snap inside me. I thought about the nights I couldn't sleep, the money I never saved, the way my future kept shrinking to make room for his comfort. For the first time, I didn't soften my voice. I said, "I can't do that." The silence that followed was sharp and immediate. My mom's eyes widened like I'd spoken a foreign language. "What do you mean, you can't?" she asked. My dad's tone hardened. "You're the only one in a position to help." I said no again. Calmly. Clearly. I explained I was exhausted. That I needed to start building my own life. My mom stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "So you're just going to abandon your brother?" she demanded. My dad shook his head, disappointment written all over his face. In that moment, I realized this wasn't a request. It was an expectation. And by refusing, I hadn't just said no to money, I'd challenged the entire role they'd built me into. I didn't know it yet, but that single word was about to cost me everything. I didn't recognize my family after that conversation. It was like something in them flipped the second I stopped cooperating. The same parents who used to praise me for being dependable suddenly talked to me like I was a problem that needed fixing. My mom stopped asking how my day was. My dad's tone turned clipped, distant, like I'd disappointed him in some permanent way. They started rewriting history in real time. Every sacrifice I'd made was minimized. "You act like you've done everything," my mom snapped one night. "We never asked you to do all that." I remember staring at her, stunned, because just days earlier she'd thanked me for holding this family together. Now I was dramatic. Selfish. Keeping score. My brother became untouchable. If I so much as sighed when his name came up, my parents jumped in. "He's sensitive," my dad warned. "Watch how you talk about him." Meanwhile, anything I said was picked apart. My words were too harsh. My tone was wrong. My boundaries were aggressive. It felt like I'd crossed some invisible line and there was no way back. One night, my mom cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting water. The lights were dim, the house quiet. "I didn't raise you to be like this," she said, voice low and sharp. "Family doesn't turn their back when things get hard." I tried to explain again that I wasn't turning my back, I was drowning. She cut me off. "You're thinking about yourself too much." Even my brother started looking at me differently. Not angry. Worse. Entitled. Like my refusal was a betrayal instead of self-preservation. He didn't argue with me. He didn't plead. He just let my parents fight for him, confident they'd force me back into place. The pressure became constant. Passive-aggressive comments. Long silences. Doors closing harder than necessary. Every day felt like walking through a house that didn't want me in it anymore. Then my dad finally said the words that made my stomach drop. "If you're not willing to support this family," he said slowly, "maybe you shouldn't be living here." He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just stated it like a fact. And that's when I realized this wasn't about money anymore. It was about control, and I was about to lose my place entirely. I thought he was bluffing. Even after he said it, I stood there waiting for someone to laugh, or soften it, or take it back. But no one did. My mom didn't defend me. She just crossed her arms and looked away, like the decision had already been made and my reaction was an inconvenience. "So, that's it?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to me, like it was coming from someone else. "You're kicking me out because I won't pay for him?" My dad exhaled slowly, the way he always did when he wanted to seem reasonable. "We're asking you to leave because you're creating negativity in the house." Negativity. Not the bills. Not the pressure. Me. My mom finally spoke. "You've changed," she said, shaking her head. "Ever since you started saying no, you've become selfish." That word hit harder than anything else. Selfish. After years of covering expenses, sacrificing time, shrinking my life. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt locked. They gave me a deadline. 2 weeks. Like I was a tenant who violated a lease instead of their son. I remember going back to my room and just sitting on the bed, staring at the walls I'd grown up with. The posters. The scratches on the desk. Everything suddenly felt temporary, like it already belonged to someone else. Packing was worse. Every item I put in a box felt like proof that this was really happening. My brother walked past my door once, headphones on, not saying a word. He didn't help. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look uncomfortable. That hurt more than if he'd yelled at me. The night before I left, my mom stood in the doorway and said, "You know you can still fix this." I asked her how. She didn't hesitate. "Do the right thing." I realized then that the right thing had nothing to do with love or fairness. It meant obedience. When I finally walked out with my bags, no one hugged me. No one said they'd miss me. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and the quiet that followed was terrifying. I stood there on the porch for a second, heart racing, realizing I didn't just lose a place to live. I lost my family. The first few weeks after I left barely feel real when I look back on them. Everything blurred together: cheap takeout, sleepless nights, and the constant low-grade panic humming under my skin. I crashed on a co-worker's couch at first, pretending it was temporary, even though I had no real plan. Every time I closed my eyes, my chest tightened like I'd forgotten something important, or someone. I wasn't just broke. I was untethered. No safety net. No family to fall back on. The silence was the worst part. My phone stayed empty. No texts asking if I was okay. No calls to make sure I landed on my feet. It was like the moment I stopped being useful, I stopped existing. I remember standing in a grocery store aisle, staring at price tags, doing mental math down to the cent. My hands were shaking, not from hunger, but from the realization that this was all on me now. If I failed, there was no one left to catch me. I'd never felt that kind of pressure before, pure, unforgiving responsibility with no emotional backup. At night, I replayed everything. My mom's words. My dad's calm voice telling me to leave. I wondered if I really was selfish. If I should have just paid. If enduring a little more would have kept my family intact. Those thoughts ate at me when the room was dark and quiet, when there was nothing to distract me from them. The lowest point came one night when I sat alone on the floor of the tiny room I'd rented, surrounded by unpacked boxes. The air smelled stale. The walls were thin. I hadn't eaten all day. I felt small, disposable, like I'd been cut out of my own life without warning. I pressed my forehead into my knees and just sat there, numb. That was rock bottom. No anger left. No pride. Just exhaustion and a deep, hollow ache where belonging used to be. But somewhere in that silence, a different thought crept in, quiet, almost unwelcome. No one was asking me for anything anymore. And I didn't yet know whether that freedom was going to save me, or break me completely. Something strange happened once the shock wore off. Without my parents' voices in my head, without the constant pressure to fix everyone else's problems, there was suddenly space. Uncomfortable space. Quiet space. At first, it scared me. I didn't know who I was without obligations pulling at me from every direction. I started small, because that's all I could manage. I picked up extra shifts at work, not out of panic this time, but purpose. Every dollar I earned stayed with me. That alone felt surreal. I opened my banking app one night and realized no one had asked for a transfer in weeks. My chest tightened, not with stress, but with something close to relief. The more distance I had from my family, the clearer things became. I noticed how my shoulders weren't constantly tense anymore. How I slept through the night without bracing for the next demand. I realized how often I'd apologized in my old life for needing rest, for being tired, for existing outside of usefulness. No one here expected that from me. There was a moment that shifted everything. I ran into an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We grabbed coffee, and he asked casually, "So what VE you been up to?" I almost said nothing. Almost minimized it. Then I stopped myself. I talked about work. About moving out. About figuring things out alone. He looked at me and said, "Man, you sound lighter." That word stuck with me. For the first time, I started imagining a future that didn't revolve around rescuing anyone. I began saving, small amounts at first. I said no without explaining myself. I stopped checking my phone, waiting for messages that never came. The absence stopped hurting as much once I accepted it was intentional. But the biggest realization hit late one night as I sat by my window, city lights flickering below. Everything I was building now, every step forward, was happening without them. Without their approval. Without their permission. I thought that would hurt more than it did. Instead, it scared me. Because if I could survive and even grow without my family, then what did that say about everything they'd convinced me I needed them for? I didn't know it yet, but that quiet progress was about to reach people who had never expected me to make it this far without them. Success didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, almost cautiously, like it wasn't sure it was welcome yet. A better role at work. A small raise. Enough savings that I stopped checking my balance every morning with dread. I moved out of that tiny room and into a modest place of my own. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Every corner of it existed because I made it happen. What surprised me most was how little I thought about my family during that time. Not because I didn't care, but because my days were finally full of things that belonged to me: goals, routines, plans that didn't require permission. I stopped bracing myself for disappointment. I stopped rehearsing arguments in my head. Life felt quieter, steadier. Still, there were moments that hurt in unexpected ways. When coworkers talked about family dinners. When holidays came around and my phone stayed silent. I'd sit alone on my couch, the TV on low, telling myself it was fine. That I chose this. Some nights I believed it. Other nights, I just sat with the ache and let it pass. Months turned into years. I grew into someone my younger self wouldn't recognize: more confident, less apologetic. I learned how to rest without guilt. How to say no without explaining myself. I even caught myself laughing more, like my body was slowly unlearning tension it had carried for too long. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed while I was cooking dinner. I almost ignored it. When I glanced down, my stomach dropped. It was my mom. Just her name on the screen, nothing else. No missed calls before it. No warm-up message. I stared at it longer than I want to admit, my mind racing through every possibility. An apology. A demand. An emergency. Part of me felt 12 years old again, bracing for impact. I didn't open it right away. I turned the stove off and sat down, heart pounding harder than it had in years. Whatever was on that screen had the power to reopen wounds I'd worked so hard to close. After all this time, after cutting me loose without hesitation, they were reaching out. And something told me it wasn't because they suddenly missed me. I finally opened the message after staring at it long enough for the screen to dim. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a greeting. It was, "Can we talk?" Just 3 words, like nothing had happened between us. Like years of silence and abandonment could be folded up and ignored. We met a few days later at a cafe near my place. I got there early and sat by the window, watching people pass by, my stomach tight the entire time. When my parents walked in, they looked older. More tired. My mom smiled like she used to, soft and careful. My dad nodded at me, polite, almost formal. It felt like meeting distant relatives, not the people who raised me. We made small talk at first. Work. Weather. Neutral ground. Then my mom's voice dropped. "Things have been hard," she said. I waited. My dad cleared his throat. "We're struggling financially," he admitted. And there it was. The reason. They told me my brother still wasn't working consistently. That expenses had piled up. That stress was taking a toll. My mom reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine but not touching. "We wouldn't ask if we had another option," she said. The words were familiar. Too familiar. They framed it like reconciliation. Like this was a chance to heal. "Families help each other," my dad added, echoing the same line he'd used years ago. I noticed how neither of them mentioned kicking me out. Or how long they'd ignored me. Or what it cost me to rebuild my life alone. I listened quietly, my heart pounding but my face calm. Something had changed in me. The old panic wasn't there. Just clarity. I realized they hadn't come back because they missed me. They came back because the safety net was gone and they remembered who used to be it. My mom finally asked, "So, what do you think?" I looked at their hopeful faces, at the familiar expectations settling back into place, and felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. Because for the first time, I understood something they didn't. This time, I wasn't trapped. And whatever I said next was going to change everything. I took a slow breath before answering, buying myself a few seconds to steady my voice. The cafe smelled like burnt coffee and sugar, and the clink of cups behind the counter felt painfully loud. I realized they were both watching me closely, reading my face the way they used to, looking for signs of compliance.
I think we need to be honest, I said finally. My mom blinked, clearly not expecting that.
My dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossing defensively.
I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse.
I just started laying things out, piece by piece, the way I'd replayed them in my head 1,000 times when I was alone. I talked about the bills I paid.
The nights I skipped sleep and plans in peace.
I talked about being told I was selfish for needing boundaries. I described packing my life into boxes while my brother walked past my room without a word. My mom tried to interrupt once, that's not how it happened, but I kept going. For the first time, I didn't stop myself to protect their comfort. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed steady.
You didn't ask me to leave, I said quietly. You told me to.
My dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see the discomfort settling in, the shift from confidence to something closer to guilt.
I looked at my mom. You said I could fix everything if I did the right thing. I want to know what was the right thing for me. She didn't answer. Her eyes dropped to the table. Then I said the part I'd been holding back.
I won't pay for him.
Not now. Not ever again.
The words felt heavy, final.
My dad stiffened immediately. So you're just going to turn your back on us? He asked, anger creeping in. I shook my head. No. I already know what it feels like to be abandoned. I won't do that to myself again. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating.
My mom's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were for me, or for the consequences finally catching up to them. As I stood up to leave, my dad called my name, his voice sharper now.
If you walk away from this, he said, don't expect things to ever be the same.
I paused with my hand on the chair, heart pounding.
Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that anymore.
And what I did next would decide whether I finally chose myself or let them pull me back in one last time. I stood there for a moment after my dad said that, his words hanging in the air like a final test.
Don't expect things to ever be the same.
I realized something almost painfully simple: they were already never the same. They hadn't been since the day the door closed behind me and no one tried to stop it.
I know, I said quietly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself again. I just picked up my jacket and walked out of the cafe.
The bell above the door chimed softly, completely indifferent to the fact that something huge had just ended. Outside, the air felt colder than I expected, but it also felt clean.
Like a deep breath after years of holding one in.
I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. My hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from release. I cried, not the desperate, broken kind I'd cried on that apartment floor years ago, but something slower.
Grief mixed with relief. Mourning the family I thought I had, and accepting the one I actually did. They texted me afterward. Long messages. Emotional ones. My mom talked about regret.
My dad talked about pride and disappointment in the same sentence.
My brother didn't message at all. That told me everything I needed to know. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Just because I didn't need to anymore. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that.
There was no dramatic victory music, no instant peace. But something fundamental shifted.
I stopped feeling guilty when I rested. I stopped explaining my boundaries to people who benefited from breaking them.
I started trusting myself in a way I never had before.
I used to believe loyalty meant enduring anything. That love meant sacrificing yourself until there was nothing left. Now I know better. Love that costs you your dignity isn't love. Family that only wants you when you're useful isn't family.
I built my life without them. I learned who I was when no one was pulling the strings. And for the first time, the future doesn't feel heavy.
It feels open.
And if they ever beg again, I already know my answer, not because I'm angry, but because I finally chose myself.